This individual, Mateen, came under investigation a few years ago himself because of his own actions and his own statements. He was investigated. We looked to see whether or not he was going to act to carry out some of the statements he was making. Didn't find evidence at that time, and it was closed. He came under the radar again in the context of another investigation because someone that he knew had traveled overseas to become a suicide bomber, and he was interviewed then but was not directly involved in that matter.
All right, there, Attorney General Loretta Lynch earlier today discussing the FBI's investigation into the Orlando terrorist just weeks prior before the attack. But for some, that's not enough. And for more on this and how they have handled the investigation so far, we are joined now by Kimberley Strassel. She is a member of the Wall Street Journal's editorial board. She is also the author of the new book, The Intimidation Game, How the Left is Silencing Free Speech. And Kimberley, it's great to have you with us today here on Newsmax Prime.
It's great to be on.
All right, so when we look at this situation that played out with Omar Mateen, there are a lot of folks saying this was all about censorship when the Department of Justice and the FBI originally decided to redact part of these transcripts. Is this the censorship you're talking about, the left silencing their critics, or at least trying to?
It's half of it. It's part of it. Look, what we have here, the left does not like to engage in debate because it often loses those debates, so it attempts to control information. One part of it is what we saw with this transcript, where they simply censor things, don't give all the information to the public, try to rewrite the narrative. But the other side, and this is what my book is about, is where they actively go out and they attempt to suppress free speech on the conservative side, to intimidate and harass people out of taking part in politics so that they don't have to debate them.
You talk about, in the book, you talk about the IRS as the perfect example of this, and Lois Lerner in that speech she gave before the American Bar Association, where she just came out and said that they had targeted these conservative organizations. Of course, Lois Lerner is no longer with the IRS, but there have been attempts by Republicans to get rid of John Koskinen, who's now part of the IRS, but they haven't been successful in doing so. Why not?
They ought to be successful because in this book, look, it goes through, I like to say that it's the first beginning to end story of what actually happened at the IRS. Who did it, how it got started, who lied about it. And the reality is that John Koskinen has been part of the continuing lies and retelling of history that we're talking about here. And that to this day, the Obama administration and Koskinen want to suggest that this was just a couple of line agents in Cincinnati that didn't understand the law. Lois Lerner has said the same thing when she came out at that ABA meeting. In fact, we know, and all of the reporting is there in the book, that the IRS was out there. There were Democratic senators who were encouraging to act against these nonprofits. The president was out saying things about these nonprofits every single day on the campaign trail in 2010. There was a huge debate in the entire public sphere about the need to crack down on these nonprofits from the left, and the IRS heard all that and they acted.
Yeah, you look at this situation, you could say that there's been a chilling effect as a result, and it's basically there hasn't been anything done to prevent the Obama administration from doing that again this election cycle.
No, and now we have, by the way, the Obama administration issuing a veto threat against House legislation that would cut funds to the IRS. Now, of course, the House wants to cut funds because the IRS has done nothing to reform itself. And it does chill speech. One of the groups that I interviewed for the book, because the book tells these stories through the eyes and the tales of the people who were targeted in all of these different events, not just the IRS. But one of them is Karen Kenney, who ran a group called the San Fernando Valley Patriots. She still does. They were a good example of a group that gave up trying to get their application passed through the IRS because the questions were so intrusive and the abuse was so insane.
And what would happen, let's say, if Hillary Clinton does win? What does she do with these types of, I don't know what the word is, these aggressive tactics used by bureaucracies like the IRS?
I think it's a terrifying precedent that's been set by the Obama administration because you have this now in so many forms and fashions. You've got bureaucrats acting at the whim of the president, and that's what you saw in the IRS. You saw it as well in the fact that there were audits, for instance, of conservative donors who the president called out, but you also now have prosecutors getting in on the game, which is even more scary. Look, for instance, the book has all of the details about what happened in that Wisconsin John Doe probe into those 30 conservative groups that supported Scott Walker's reforms up in Wisconsin, and the complete harassment they came under, a criminal probe into them over bogus campaign finance allegations that it took the Supreme Court in that state to shut down. We're seeing it again already with the Exxon prosecutors, the people who are going out and they are suggesting that somehow Exxon could come under RICO charges simply because it's coming out with it has had views on climate that don't conform with their own. So it's prosecutorial, it's bureaucrats, it's executive actions that can happen. Look, Hillary Clinton is out there at the moment talking about how if she's elected, one of her top campaign promises is to change the First Amendment to allow government to decide who can speak in elections.
Right. It's absurd. And it's not just the Obama administration either. You also talk about Kamala Harris, the Attorney General of California, and Eric Schneiderman, the Attorney General in New York. Both of them are somewhat notorious for taking these appealing, at least to the left, these appealing news stories and trying to use them to further their own political careers.
Yeah, and that's an even other more dangerous aspect which we talk about in the book, because it gets into disclosure and the fact that the conservatives need to rethink disclosure, because this is what Kamala Harris and Eric Schneiderman are doing. They want the names of conservative donors, and they want them not for the reasons that they say. They claim they want it for better, cleaner, more transparent elections. That's nonsense. They want it so that they have new target lists of people to go after and harass and intimidate out of politics. Now, we're lucky out in California, a federal judge recently stopped Kamala Harris's efforts to get a hold of those names. But you see more attorneys general across the country climbing onto that effort from the left because they want to out people so that they'll be scared to take part.
Yeah, and as J.D. Hayworth, who normally hosts this show, likes to point out, his acronym for Attorney General is also aspiring governors, so maybe that's why they like to try to push these types of issues. Let's take a listen to something that former Secret Service agent Dan Bongino said on this program just last week, talking about the policy difference on this front between Donald Trump and the Obama administration. Let's take a listen.
The President of the United States, who has never, ever formulated a strategy at all to go after ISIS, has the, I'll leave the term blank, let's just say the nerve, I was going to say something different, has the nerve to get on television and have a 13-year-old's tantrum because what? The Republican presumptive nominee for the presidency goes out there and says, hey folks, newsflash, we have a problem with a very small portion of people who practice Islam, granted, but yes, this is radical, these people are doing this and they're looking to kill us.
Well, I know you've been no fan of Donald Trump, at least not to a certain extent, but one of the things that is refreshing to a lot of his supporters is his ability to speak his mind without this filter, this political correctness filter. Do you think this will actually help him, or is there a limit to how far he can take this?
No, there is no question that one of Donald Trump's strengths is his ability to speak freely about issues that a lot of people feel constrained by. And I have no doubt, by the way, that that is in fact one of his attractions to a lot of people, in that they have looked out, people in the conservative movement have looked out and they watched everything that happened with the IRS and with Wisconsin and with the campaigns that have been leveled against corporations or free market groups like ALEC, or to individual Americans, like what happened to people out in California during the Prop 8 campaign. And they have felt constrained as a result of this. So they want a politician who's going to tell it like it is. And I think that if Donald Trump can stay on message about an issue like this is his running room to really make something out of this campaign. It's because Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, if they are weak on anything, they are weak on the national security front and the economic front. And if Donald Trump can go out there and make that case every single day, and also do it with his usual candor, then that is a potential for a road to the White House.
We'll see if he can stay on message. There's a lot of folks hoping he does. Kimberley Strassel, thanks so much for being with us. The new book, again, is called The Intimidation Game. Certainly worth getting, certainly worth reading, too, for anyone who wants to make sure they're informed for this upcoming election. Thanks so much for being with us. Pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you.
All right, that's going to do it for us here on Newsmax Prime. It's been a pleasure being with you. Just a reminder, you can stay with us. You can always participate in the conversation. Our time is about to come to an end, but we'd love to hear from you. In the future, you can reach us at 877-NEWSMAX. That's 877-639-7629. go ahead and program it in your phone and give us a call. I'm John Bachman in for J.D. Hayworth. Newsmax Prime will be back tomorrow night. Make sure you tune in.